Hello and welcome to the big picture. The visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping had raised a lot of expectations. The ongoing visit, which started in Ahmedabad yesterday and moved to Delhi last night, is continuing. Today saw the Chinese President and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi holding one-to-one talks as well as delegation-level talks. A dozen agreements and MOUs have been signed between the two countries, including a 5-year trade and development plan which envisages a $20 billion investment from China, reducing the trade imbalance, among others. There have also been agreements in the field of railways, culture, audiovisual co-production, as well as in the field of space research and cooperation, among others. However, all through the visit of the Chinese president, the Chinese army and civilian incursions in Ladakh on the line of actual control has cast a shadow on the visit. The two leaders, however, did not avoid the issue, though it was certainly underplayed. The two leaders have agreed to clearly demarcate the borders as soon as possible. We will discuss today the outcome of the visit of Chinese president and whether it has lived up to the expectations. To discuss this, I have with me Pinak Ranjan Chakravarthy, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Srikanth Kandapalli will be on the phone line for the present. He is a professor at the Center for Chinese Studies. Baladas Ghoshal, Senior Fellow, Center for Policy Research. Welcome to all of you. Srikanth, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Srikanth, we had a discussion just 2 days back also. You're also on that, in that discussion.
Yes,
Today,
yes.
at the end of these talks, because, I think more or less the official part of the visit is over as far as this visit is concerned. You think that it has lived up to the expectations?
I think the kind of hype created a week before the visit and the number of agreements signed, I think there is some disjuncture in this because it has been suggested that President Xi Jinping's visit will be mainly in the economic field.
Right.
Of course, there are three main agreements on the economic field. One
Right.
is the industrial park, second, $20 billion investments in the next 5 years, and then in the railway projects.
Right.
So these are substantial enough, but these are not spectacular enough.
Right.
Because we heard that the Chinese Consul General in Mumbai suggested to $100 billion investment, but we came across just about $20 billion investment. However, I think this visit is useful in establishing a personal chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping.
Okay.
This is very, very useful in international relations.
Okay. Meanwhile, let me get Mr. Chakravarthy. There was a lot of hype around this visit. There was no doubt about it. But at the end of it, this $100 billion was being touted all over the place that there will be a $100 billion investment in the next 5 years. But it has just been reduced to $20 billion. Why do you think this is happening?
No, I was always a little confused about where this $100 billion figure came from. Because I don't think it came from the government. But it obviously came from commentators and perhaps the media, I don't know where. But let's look at the agreement, a $20 billion agreement. Basically, it's I think into the industrial parks and manufacturing that will probably take place there. And 20 billion, I think, is basically government to government because that is the agreement.
Yes.
But beyond that, obviously, there will be private companies and others who might follow, and you might have maybe more investments. I think there is no need to hype up this. I don't think it would be. It was practical to expect that everything will be solved in one visit, and I think it was it was not expected, I think, and by diplomats and others. But whatever has been done, and I think it was very clear that it will concentrate on the economic side, because that is where China was willing and India was also willing. I think it was to mutual benefit that this is happening. And I believe that the economic side will take off. And maybe from there on, we can go off to other side. The other agreements are basically software agreements, when I say software, I mean culture, education. But these are also important in terms of building relationships.
Okay, we are now joined in by Mr. Sheshadri Chari, BJP leader. Sheshadri Chari, are you happy with the outcome of the visit? At the end of the day, because there was so much hype around, because this was essentially supposed to be a trade and commerce and infrastructure agreement by visit, but at the end of it, and $100 billion was what was being envisaged. Why do you think it is, it is just boiled down to some $20 billion in 5 years? Just to put it in a perspective, like the other day, one of our guests on this panel was saying the requirement of the funds in India as far as infrastructure and things like that are concerned in the next 5 years is something like $1.8 trillion or something. Even $100 billion doesn't look very big in that context, but now $20 billion.
No, see, this 120 and all these things are all, I think, as he very rightly pointed out, it's a hype. It was a hype. Nowhere did the government of India say this or the government of China say this. But of course, there are people who calculate on the basis of if so many agreements are signed, this is the outcome of these so many agreements. I think that is how the figure should have come out. But what is important is, as you very rightly pointed out, I think trade, commerce, industry, infrastructure and economic development and cooperation is what is very important. It's a settled fact that the Chinese economy is far ahead of the Indian economy, and Chinese economy is matching the US economy, and China can probably virtually turn out to be the first economy in the world. Then next would be US and the third would be India. So India
or Japan.
India can move from say fifth or fourth to fourth place to third place and to even second place. But if you combine the economic strength of China and India in the region, it becomes probably the first economic power in the whole world. So I think that is where the Chinese government and the Indian government, at least these two leaders, are looking at. And I think historically these two leaders, Narendra Modi and the Chinese president, are in a position to implement this. So I think that is the
you think some kind of a foundation has been built for a better
future? Yes, that is the basis. That is the basis of this relationship. And I think if this visit paves the way for a future cooperation, obviously this cooperation is not going to brush aside all the contentious issues under the carpet.
We will come to the contentious issues. Professor Ghoshal, how would you look at this?
This talk about 100 billion, I think came from the Chinese sources.
Okay.
If I'm correct, it is the Consul General in Bombay who actually talked about this to one of the journalists, and it was reported that $100 billion.
And then the media hyped it up.
Of course, media hype. Now, as I look at the whole thing, so far that has happened between India and China this second day, I don't see anything spectacular as such. Now, it is like business as usual. There have been agreements like this even earlier.
It is not something which a presidential visit of the Chinese presidential visit you could have expected. The higher expectations was valid. Would you agree with that?
Definitely, because then what was the need for Xi Jinping to come to India at this juncture? And particularly at a time, when just the new government took over power, and there was nothing, any moment which you can say that it required the Chinese president to come. And obviously everyone expected that something new had to be offered from the Chinese side. Now, as far as the economic issues are concerned, there had been, growing relationship between the two countries in terms of trade, investment, but there was nothing new that was really achieved in this particular, except a few things like, railway sort of cooperation.
Even the railways is something, it's a long-term thing. It will take, we're just studying the high-speed trains and things like that. There's no mention of bullet trains.
No, not yet.
There's no mention of the bullet trains. In fact, let me get Srikanth. How would you look at this, the investment proposals, and why do you think this hype was there, and why is it that it's such a disappointment if you take into consideration all those expectations as far as the investments are concerned?
I think there was a mention about the high-speed railway in that. Of course, it is in the detail.
Yes, they talk of high-speed trains, and
not the bullet train.
Not the bullet trains.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
But I feel that Prime Minister Modi had stood his ground on various contentious issues.
Right.
For example, in the background of the report recently about tumor, About 1,000 troops, it seems, have been deployed in this region. I think
Srikanth, sorry, let us finish with this economic thing before we go into that.
All right.
You think that you think that this kind of an investment is something. You think the Chinese have been a little cautious about what they would like to invest? What are they trying to look for, and what are they trying to ensure before they really push in more investments here?
I think the Chinese have come with a game plan, which is number one, to open up more the Indian market in terms of telecommunication, power sector, which they have done before, but more further expansion.
Right.
Secondly, on the visa related issues, because in 2005, over 25,000 Chinese visas were not extended at that point of time. So the visa in relation to business is another aspect of the Chinese thrust in recent period. I think they also emphasized on the BCIM corridor.
Right. But there is no mention of BCIM.
But if you look at Prime Minister Modi's press statement, it is a conditional acceptance of BCIM.
Right.
Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor.
Right.
There is a conditional kind of acceptance of the BCM.
Okay. Mr. Chakravarthy, as far as we will, let us go to the most contentious issue as far as the border problem is concerned. Is it the first time that at such a high level they have actually discussed the issue and they have said that we'll do something about it?
It's not certainly the first time. I think this has been discussed before. We've had special representatives meeting.
No, but at the highest level, it has been discussed this time.
Well, certainly between these two leaders.
Yes.
But I'm not. When I say it has been discussed before, I mean between the leadership earlier, and agreements have been made on maintaining peace and tranquility, and generally keeping the peace on the border despite these intrusions from the Chinese side. Which generally tend to then again go back to the status quo. Now, I am hoping that the same thing is going to happen here. The point to be noted is why are they continuing with this situation at the border during such a high-level visit, and that too the first by this Chinese president to India? I think that is the question we must address. Now, we can read all kinds of messages into this, but I don't want to speculate. The intrusion began before the visit, and it has continued.
It has continued during the visit.
During the visit. Now, the question is, what is at stake? Is there something more than what we know? Why is it being continued? Is it a message from the president or from China saying that, well, we can have a visit, but the border is disputed, so the border situation can go either way, go here and there. I don't know. I don't know what message we should read into it. But my feeling is that it is a signal that, look, there is a border dispute and we'll have to deal with it. And they have said so, I think both leaders.
Both of them have said
that we will be sincere, etc., and we'll dealing with this issue.
Sheshadri, Chari, how would you look at this? There is this border intrusion happening, as he rightly pointed out, before he came, during it still continues. And the government seems to have underplayed the whole thing. Do you think it's the right thing to do to underplay it?
It's usually it has been a diplomatic practice with China that before and after the visit, usually these things go together. They extend the hand of peace, and at some place, if you remember when Vajpayee landed in Beijing, at the same time they mounted an attack on Vietnam. And every time there is
Vietnam is okay, but this is happening right at the border, our border.
But we don't know. These things keep on happening between India and China. That is the way they conduct their diplomacy. Now, this also probably, we don't know. We'll have to wait for the details. But there are not everything is hunky-dory as far as the Chinese internal situation is concerned. Politically, although this president is also the he holds 3 posts.
Right.
He is the Secretary General of the party, he is the President of the country, and he is also in charge of the army.
Military.
But earlier this was not the situation to a large extent. I think after Chairman Mao, Now after Chairman Mao, even the post of chairman has been cancelled. So he is virtually the chairman of the country. But all said and done, we cannot really say that the entire army is under his control. There could be some divisions within the army which probably does not want to do this, or probably it is a matter, it's a calibrated approach.
You're talking of a situation similar to what is happening in Pakistan, what we keep discussing always about Pakistan.
There are problems in many of these situations.
Okay.
As in Pakistan, there could be problems in China also.
That's interesting.
But it is to be, one has to wait and see the situation, internal situation in the country.
Okay, now we are joined in by Siddharth Varadarajan, a senior journalist and senior fellow at the Center for Public Affairs and Critical Theory at the Shiv Nadar University. Welcome, Siddharth. Siddharth, how would you look at this entire, at the final outcome? Two very important things which we have been discussing before you came. One is, of course, as far as the investments are concerned, this huge hype which was created about $100 billion investment in the next 5 years. And second, about what the two leaders have said as far as the border is concerned.
Well, I think $20 billion, which is the figure that the two sides have spoken about in their joint statement and in their interactions, is a significant step up from the 400 million that is the FDI stock from China and India. So I think that we needn't, in a way, dismiss this figure. Of course, 100 billion is 100 billion, is 5 times more than that. But there was an air of unbelievability about the 100 billion, right? The Chinese have often, if you recall, 2 years ago, they signed an MOU with Iran promising $100 billion worth of hydrocarbon trade. None of that has materialized. So I think I would much rather a more grounded, realistic, achievable number like 20 billion than a wild promise of 100 billion. So I think that as far as that goes, it's satisfactory. The boundary issue is a complicated one, right? I think the fact that you have an incident during the visit of President Xi Jinping is itself testimony to the fact that how unpredictable this unsettled boundary can be. Of course, both sides have played it down, and rightly so. Both sides have spoken about how this is the product of an undemarcated boundary where you have misperceptions. It's important that these issues be settled peacefully through whatever mechanisms exist. But more importantly, the point that Prime Minister Modi appears to have made, that even as the two countries work towards a final resolution of the boundary issue via the special representatives mechanism, the work of clarifying where the line of actual control exists on the ground, in other words, the hard work of demarcating the boundary on maps, a process that was kind of suspended about 20 years ago, that process needs to restart.
Right.
And I think there, depending on how seriously the Chinese take this, I think it's possible that some progress can be made. But otherwise, I would rate this visit as a success insofar as the idea was to step up economic engagement and for India and China to talk about areas of common concern globally where they can work together. I think from that point of view, the visit seems to have accomplished what it set out to.
As far as the boundary is concerned, the two leaders have in fact made a very, very positive and very optimistic statement. In fact, they're saying that they'll quickly settle the border dispute, demarcate the boundaries and things like that. Professor Ghoshal, is it as easier said than done? As far as the boundary is concerned, demarcating it has been festering for the last 50 years.
Definitely, it's a difficult process. But at the same time, the point that I was raising, that if it were just economic sort of transactions that were going to be, undertaken by the two countries, there was no need for a presidential visit like Xi Jinping's. So the expectation that people had that this visit will yield something more than what was, in economics, I think that was quite valid. But from that perspective, nothing really spectacular has happened, no further. And one more point about even this investments and other things about infrastructure. Infrastructure, wherever the Chinese had gone to build infrastructures, they had taken their own people, the Chinese workers.
Right.
Now, in the case of India, would that be feasible? And whether that would create some problems. So even the expectation about this infrastructure development or the support
there are still stumbling blocks there?
Oh yes, definitely stumbling blocks.
Siddharth, would you like to react to that?
No, see,
what Professor Ghoshal says?
I think that the approach of the Modi government will be quite different from the cautiousness that Manmohan Singh when he was Prime Minister displayed. I think there was a reluctance to, there was a, I think, over-anxiety about FDI from China. While this is understandable in strategic sectors like ports, for example, but the previous government took it to absurd lengths. You know,
Even in telecom, we had a lot of
no,
problems.
but telecoms, well, telecoms, switching equipment, I think there's a valid concern. But the fact is that Chinese handsets are all over the place in India. And it's quite easy for somebody to monitor, for a chip to be put in handsets. So I think sometimes these, but where the concerns were over-exaggerated was, for example, when the security agencies refused to clear the import of aero bridges for many of the airports that the Airports Authority of India had modernized in Madurai, Calcutta, etc. So I think the previous government took it to absurd lengths. I think the Modi government will be more rational. And I think the Modi government has an ambitious economic agenda which requires heavy infrastructure spending. And if the Chinese are able to deploy their surplus capital for projects that are needed by India, I think that I don't see that this use of Chinese labor. You know, India is a labor surplus country. While there would obviously be some, you know, managerial or supervisory staff, you know, there's no room for Chinese workmen on a large scale. You know, and you know, whatever projects they've executed in Chhattisgarh, other places, the number of them have not been something that the country can't manage.
And you don't think the Chinese would insist on that also?
Well, they haven't so far.
I
mean, in the sense that it's not as if the Chinese have not done projects here. So the Chinese have, and the Chinese may even be wary. You will recall the accident in Korba, which finally led to, at a steel plant, which led to a criminal case being filed against Chinese employees. So I think there are complications involved here. What we have is a situation where the Chinese are very, very keen to use their surplus capital in a way that would give them a proper return. India needs investment in its infrastructure sector. So it's a win-win situation, a formula that the Chinese love to speak about. And so I don't see this as a big obstacle. Where and you know, in the joint statement and the agreement is talk of cooperation in space, in the arena of space, in the arena of high-speed rail. So some new paths, some new avenues have opened up. But a lot will depend on the political goodwill. I think that economic relations or trade or investment alone can't resolve these matters. And I think political dialogue between the leaders is essential.
Absolutely. Srikanth, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Srikanth, you know, I want you to address two issues. One is what Professor Ghoshal's point is that you know, there was so much hype about this visit, the kind of outcome which we have seen. You know, was it necessary for a Chinese president after so many years to come and to you know, get these kind of things?
I think it is necessary for President Xi Jinping to make this visit, partly because it had developed so far with the Sabarmati riverfront stroll and in the conversation in the Sabarmati ashram and so on. I think it had created a personal chemistry between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi. I think this will stand very well in terms of the next 5 to 10 years of their engagement and bilateral relations. Supposing if we have hit a rock bottom in bilateral relations, I think these contacts are pretty useful for de-escalating tensions or in a positive sense in terms of, you know, building up relationship between the two sides. I think this is very essential that President Xi Jinping made this visit.
And as far as the border issue is concerned, you think the kind of words which we have heard from the two leaders, is it comforting? Because there are still people say, you know, who feel that this may not be enough. You know, demarcating the boundary is easier said than done. And Sheshadri Chari very interestingly points out that, you know, there may be a Pakistan kind of situation there where the military may have a different mindset than what the leadership has.
That is interesting in relation to the civil-military relations in China.
Right.
Especially as President Xi Jinping is also the chairman of the Central Military Commission. And in terms of the event that has happened in the last few days in Chumar area,
right.
So this is an interesting comment from Mr. Sheshadri. But I would like to get back to the territorial dispute as a whole. I mean, I don't think the President Xi Jinping, Prime Minister Modi were tasked to discuss and resolve the territorial dispute. In fact, we have had about 33 years of discussion on this topic. In 1960, in 1980s till now, almost every year except when India exploded the nuclear tests. We have conducted these talks regularly on a year-to-year basis. But we have not been able to resolve, I think partly because the perceptions are changing, the ground reality is...
No, but what do you think will happen now? Do you think that there will be a change, there will be a better momentum as far as this issue is concerned?
I think Prime Minister Modi's statement in the press after the Hyderabad House meetings, I think that is quite instructive. He suggested that unless until the concerns of each other is respected, we are not going to we are not going to pursue the economic potential of these two countries. I think he was referring to the territorial dispute.
Okay.
I think he was referring to
Okay.
a host of problems. So it is a conditional kind of acceptance.
Okay.
I thought that Modi had stood his ground.
Okay. Mr. Chakravarthy, would you agree that
I
it's a
would.
conditional, whatever has happened is conditional?
I think it's pretty clear that we are engaging economically, but how far do we go will depend on what happens at the border. Is there any resolution at the border?
Sheshadri, Chari, would you agree with that?
India has made the point very clear, just as China has also made the point very clear. China is ready to engage on economic ground with us, and they really want to extend their economic support to India. And as I said before, the difference between India's economic engagement and China's economic area is very large. China is far ahead of us as far as these things are concerned. So it is always the money flowing from a higher reach to a lower reach. So that is the way we are looking at the economic things. But India has also stood its ground very well, saying that we will not allow any kind of compromise as far as these contentious issues are concerned. Of course, we are not raising the contentious issues, or we are not making it a precondition for any economic engagement, because we both have realized, both India and China have realized, that there is no point in going back to the past. But at the same time, the relationship between India and China is not like that of India and Pakistan. This, both the leaders and both the capitals know very well.
Okay. Siddharth, very quickly.
Look, the fact of the matter is that Indian territory is currently being occupied by Pakistan and by China, right? Parts of J&K are under the occupation of these two countries, and India is not in a position to alter this reality unilaterally. So there is a process of engagement, of dialogue that has to take place to ensure that the settlement which emerges finally is something which is acceptable and fair and beneficial, but that the Indian people will accept as something that is reasonable. That process has been going on. There's been 17 rounds of discussion between special representatives. Principles and parameters have been accepted, but we're nowhere close to a solution. My view is that as long as India holds on and is firm on what it believes are its national interests, we should not worry about the fact that a settlement is not coming today or tomorrow, or may get postponed by a year or two. In my view, the longer the settlement takes, the more advantageous it is for India, because the relative gap between India and China will narrow. Today, that gap in military economic terms is much greater than what it might be in 20 years' time, when the demographic reality of India begins to assert itself.
That's very interesting. Very quick last word.
Two things.
Very quickly.
I think in one way this visit is important, that Mr. Modi has been able to express India's concern very boldly to the Chinese president. And that way I think it marks a departure from earlier practices. And the second thing is that, any relationship can be only based on trust. Now, all these economic things doesn't really create the trust as yet. So I think from that perspective, the trust is not yet established by this visit.
Okay, I think on that note, I think Dr. Ghoshal has summed it up very nicely. I don't think I can do better than that. Thanks to all my guests, Siddharth, Varadarajan, Srikanth, Kandapalli, Sheshadri, Chari, Baladas, Ghoshal, and Pinak, Ranjan, Chakravarthy. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the big picture, same time tomorrow.